Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Today, a real thrill. We're joined by Dr. John Blakey, the UK's leading executive coach for purpose-driven CEOs. Dr. Blakey, thank you so much for joining us from across the pond. It's 5 o'clock and you're in Birmingham, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us on Thought Leaders Live.
I know it's great to be here, Greg, and it's perfectly civilized hour for me to join you and the listeners. So really looking forward to our conversation.
So I found Dr. Blakey I was on LinkedIn, and he made a post, and he had written an article for the Harvard Business Review called "If Trust is So Important, Why Aren't We Measuring It?" And in my role as a marketer and helping thought leaders get their words out, trust is often bandied about, but nobody really talks about measuring it. And so I thought, man, be just incredible to get Dr. Blakey on the show and really dig into the topic. So very thrilled that you're with us today. So Dr. Blakey, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your personal journey and what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, well, my passion for trust comes from this phrase that what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power. So that's at the heart of everything that I've done in my career. I wish I'd come up with those words myself, but they're actually from a trust guru called Charles Green. So my leadership career has been practical and academic. So I've explored trust and power academically, and that's where my book, The Trusted Executive, came from, and that's where the Harvard Business Review article came from. But I've also been a practicing leader, an entrepreneur, a managing director in a FTSE 100 PLC organization. So I've had to put the theory into practice and also help other leaders put the theory into practice. And it's all been about, what is the currency of your leadership? Is the currency of your leadership power, or is it trust? And I've had to learn those lessons myself. I've had to put myself under the spotlight in terms of the currency of my leadership. And I've also had the opportunity to help a lot of leaders think about that question, whether it's through coaching them, through writing books, to delivering workshops. So that's the golden thread, Greg, that's run through my career. Did lots of different job titles, lots of different companies. But if you wanted a golden thread, that's really what it's all been about.
Well, let's just address the elephant in the room here, because what you just said about trust and power is really relevant. I mean, on the political side of things, we don't need to dive into politics, but there's no question that more authoritarian leaders are coming into power. People are reacting more to the call for power and strong leaders. And I don't want to debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it seems to be a little bit at odds with the trust versus power argument. So maybe you could just touch on that so we can get that out of the way.
Yeah, I think we're at a critical point in the leadership arc, if you like, that we've have different eras characterized by different styles of leadership. And I think we're actually in a bit of a battle at the moment between these currencies of power and this currency of trust. And, it's not that power doesn't work. It's about whether it's sustainable and whether it delivers the sustainable success that most of us aspire for. So I think it's a choice. And I think right now for leaders, it's a very important choice for them to make personally. Where do they want to plant their flag? Do they want to plant their flag in power, or do they want to plant their flag in trust? Now, we know that other leaders have made that choice quite publicly and declared that and stand for that. And I respect that. I respect that. But I want to appeal to every leader who's listening to this broadcast to think about what their choice is. You know, I go to lots of workshops. I did lots of workshops where 20 minutes into the workshop, a hand goes up and somebody says, "This is all very well, John, but what's it got to do with, but what about Donald Trump?" And I go, "Yeah, well, what about Donald Trump? Who invited Donald Trump into the room? Because I didn't invite him to the room, but he's in every room at the moment. But I'm not interested in him. I'm interested in you. I'm interested in your leadership. I'm interested in your choice, because that's the thing you can control. The rest of it is stuff that's going on, that's out of your wherewithal. So, yeah, I'm really interested in helping leaders think through this choice right now. Do I stand for power or do I stand for trust? And there are many paths up the mountain, but your job is to decide which is the path that you want to tread. And I've chosen to stand for trust. And some people agree with me and some people don't. And that's fine. But I know
Well,
where I stand. And that's, for me, that's a relief. It's a relief for me to know that that's true. And I don't do it perfectly. And, I have my lapses and I make mistakes and everything else. But my true north is very, very apparent. And I've publicly declared it. I've written books about it. So everybody holds me accountable to it every day of my life.
well, I think there's something you mentioned in there that's really important. First of all, I think inherently some of us maybe are built to lean one way or the other. It's by our nature.
Yep.
But you mentioned a word there that I thought is very important, and that's sustainable. And could you then touch on that? Why trust you feel is more sustainable than power?
Well, power tends to revolve around one individual and is sustained by one individual. And as I say, the currency of power is typically fear, that it generates fear. But what you find in most human systems is that fear ultimately drives a reaction. Um, it may take time. It may sort of have different episodes, but most of the systems that we've seen built on fear over the years have not sort of lasted and have come to a tricky end of one sort or another. So we're in a world now that has got some systemic challenges, some difficult issues, some wicked problems that we need to solve together. And trust is the glue that allows that collaboration and that win-win to emerge in a way that means that different parties can sustain their engagement and commitment to that style of leadership. And there are countless academic studies that show the power of trust practically to deliver positive business outcomes, whether that's profitability, customer loyalty, staff retention, innovation. So I'm not necessarily talking to you as a moralizer. I'm not moralizing here about trust. I'm a practical business leader who has seen the impact of different styles of leadership and genuinely believes, both practically and academically, that trust is a more sustainable and more powerful currency of leadership in the modern world than power.
And trust to me also seems like a two-way street, right? I mean, power is one way, kind of this fear thing. But trust is a two-way street. When you were talking about trust, people have to trust you, but you have to trust your people too.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Maybe you could elaborate on that just a little bit more, Dr. Blakey.
Yeah, trust is a dance. It's a dance between two parties, and one party has to take the risk of giving trust, and the other part is earning trust. And so there is a contract, a psychological contract that is built there between two parties, and there is risk involved, because what happens if that trust is betrayed, or when people make mistakes, because they will do. So yeah, there is two parties involved. The leader's job is, I think, to invite people into that dance, and they have to demonstrate trustworthiness, that they are worthy of trust. But the followers part of the bargain is their propensity to trust, what academics call their propensity to trust. how willingly do you give trust to other people? I as a leader could behave exactly the same way to you and to 5 other different people, and you know 3 of you could trust me and 3 of you could not trust me, not because I'm behaving differently, but because your propensity to trust others is either higher or lower based on your experience of life, and sort of
Right.
the different relationships you've had over the years, and that have formed you. So the leader can't control trust. The leader can offer trust and invite people into that relationship. And then both parties have to keep earning that right to stay in that relationship over a period of time. So yes, it is a two-way street. But I think
Okay.
that's part of what makes it sustainable, because both parties have invested in it rather than one party controlling it.
So let's get in a little bit deeper into the topic at hand, and let's just talk a little bit first of all about measuring trust, the point of your article, and
Yeah.
why it must be measured and acted upon like any other business metric.
Yeah, there's a phrase that I use often here, Greg, about what is treasured gets measured, and we know in business life that leaders only have a certain amount of energy and attention and focus on particular KPIs, and so in the boardroom conversation with that KPI pack that gets looked at monthly, if trust isn't featured in there alongside profit and revenue and net promoter score and staff attrition, then it's not going to have that focus. It's not going to be debated. It's not going to be tracked over a period of time, and actions are not going to be agreed, to correct uh, trust if it's falling away, or to celebrate trust if it's improving. So, as you said at the start of the session, I interviewed over 70 CEOs for my research on trust. And the first question I asked them was, is trust important? And to a person, they said, yes, of course it's important. The second question I asked them was, well, how do you measure it then? And not one of those CEOs was able to say to me that they measured trust directly and tracked it as part of their KPIs. And that's why I think the title of that article in Harvard Business Review did catch people's attention, because we all know it's a truism that trust is important. But we've got this question that then gets posed about, well, if it's that important, how come we don't treat it like any other strategic variable? Now, some people say, well, you can't measure trust. It's too vague and it's too abstract. But you could have said the same about customer, goodwill or referrals. But we created the net promoter score in the world of business to make that measurable. And once we started measuring it, we were able to influence it and act on it in a much more strategic way. And so trust, you can measure it. I've offered a model to measure it. Other people have offered a model to measure it. The models are all out there. The metrics are available. It needs the will of the leadership team to actually say, we've got to put our money where our mouth is. If we're going to keep saying that trust is important, is one of our values, is part of our strapline, it's at the heart of our brand, then we need to measure it and track it and benchmark it.
Can you give us, you've got a model created to measure it, and we don't have to spend the whole show going into it, but can you give us a few specifics on things that you should be measuring?
Yeah, so my research at Aston Business School was to get at a behavioral model of trust. And the model that emerged from that 6 years of research has 3 pillars and 9 habits. And the 3 pillars of trust are ability and integrity and benevolence. And most leaders know about ability. They know that they need to be competent to be trusted. And most of them know about integrity, that they need to be honest and they need to have their ethics and their values to be trusted. The one that comes as a bit more of a surprise to a lot of leaders is this 3rd pillar of benevolence.
Right.
To the extent that some leaders are not familiar with what that word means. And benevolence is the opposite of malevolence. Benevolence is wishing well for others. It comes from the Latin benevolent, and it's really common human care, compassion, kindness. That's equally important in the formula of trust as ability and integrity. So the formula for trustworthiness is ability times integrity times benevolence. So we can then break those 3 pillars into 3 behavioral habits. We can create surveys and metrics that then measure those 9 habits. We can aggregate that up and we can generate a leadership trust score
Okay.
that we can track on a monthly, quarterly basis. And now, because we've used that model with many organizations, we can also benchmark that and say, in your sector, the average leadership trust index is 5.3, and you are currently at 5.6. So great, well
Right.
done. But here's the habits that you could focus on to take that up to 5.9. So it's as simple as that. Taking a model, converting it to metrics, and tracking that, and benchmarking it. And these are the words that we use in the model: ability, integrity, benevolence. I could go into each of those 9 habits, but 9 is quite a lot of habits. So if there's any particular habit you want me to pull out, I can do. But I think the main thing for listeners is to think about those 3 words. Am I focusing on ability and integrity and benevolence in equal measure? Because that's how you will generate a positive trust index.
I love having the numerics there. We in from the marketing standpoint, we always talk about having a quantitative goal and then a qualitative strategy to help you reach that goal. And if you don't
Yeah.
reach that goal, then your qualitative strategy would change. So we don't have to go into all 9 of the habits, but could you give me an example of a qualitative strategy from one of the habits, and how somebody might change what they're doing, one of those habits, to influence one of those 3 main metrics?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can talk about a case study to bring this to
Perfect.
life. So we brought this model to the executive board of a premiership football team in the UK. So a high profile brand that had experienced some challenges in terms of trust, wanted to make it a priority, wanted to measure it. So we were invited in, and I was invited in to help them with this. And we used this leadership trust index survey, and we generated the leadership trust index score, which we presented back to the executive. And 3 habits emerged from that discussion that they wanted to focus on to increase their trust index. And the 3 habits were coach, be open, and be brave. So coaching was, we implemented then a program where the senior leadership group went on some leadership coaching skills training. So they learned about asking powerful questions, listening actively, and all the great skills that come with great coaching, because that is one of the habits of trust. The openness, so that was the action plan around that, the qualitative action plan around openness, related to how staff and media presentations were delivered, and what information had previously been shared, and maybe what more information could be shared. So being more open about the inner sort of workings of the club and exactly what was happening in different aspects, both the good news and the bad news, because being open involves sharing where you've slipped up or where you've made mistakes, as well as where things are going well. And sometimes that doesn't happen as readily as the good news, but it's very powerful in terms of building trust for that habit. And bravery, when it comes to bravery in trust is about moral bravery. It's about calling out situations where values and ethics could be compromised. And in this example, one of the notable differences that focusing on this habit made was in the choice of sponsorship partners. So there were some sponsorship partners that were potential new partners for this sports organization, but some of them had more ethical brands than others. You can probably
Right.
sort of guess where I'm going with this. And there were actually decisions made directly as a result of the focus on trust to not engage with certain partners whose commercial offer was compelling, but whose brand ethics was potentially a reputational risk for the organization. And that's what we mean by bravery. That's what we mean by moral bravery. It's making a decision that might actually cost you in the short term, but actually underpins the long-term reputation and brand of the organization.
I think a lot of these things might come naturally to some people, and some people who are good at building trust, some leaders, this is intuitive.
Yep.
But what I think is important about what you're doing is you're systematizing it, right? You're making it systemic, and then I think that's a discipline, right? That helps keep people on track. Do you find that it helps you call them habits? You're helping to build habits, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're dead right that for a lot of leaders, trust is intuitive. But like all of us, if you're moving at speed in a very disrupted world where decisions are coming at you left, right, and center, that intuition is not as powerful as the discipline of habits and models and measurement.
Yeah.
So, these things take the implicit understanding of trust and make it explicit. And once it's explicit, as you say, once it's systematized and operationalized, then it's much easier to avoid the pitfalls and the bear traps that the modern world is throwing at leaders, every hour. And I often talk about the 9 habits of trust model as a checklist. And I talk to leaders about, next time you go into a sensitive conversation where trust is going to be under focus, then just have a look at the 9 habits before you go into that conversation and just check in with them. Just check in and say, is this a conversation where bravery might be important or openness might be important? Because it just brings it to the front of mind, gives you a checklist.
Mm.
Because otherwise you can go into these conversations relying on intuition, but unfortunately finding that intuition is not always accurate enough and precise enough to manage sensitive conversations effectively.
Interesting. So I'm going to ask you literally the money question here and put you on the spot a little bit. But you gave us that case study, and you're talking to executives about building trust and using this process. And this is going to require a change in their habits and a change in their philosophy. We always say that the key to instilling a B2B change in a B2B leader is to show them the pain of the status quo and not changing is far greater than the pain of the change. So to do that, we need bottom line results. So in the people that you have worked with who have actually undergone this model, can you share any kind of results where, okay, yeah, you could measure and you saw the trust factor going up? How did that translate to success?
Yeah, and we typically at the beginning of an engagement with a client, we will look at that initial trust score and we'll set a goal to increase that trust score over a period of 12 months. And we'll also look at the strategy of that organization and identify specific bottom line impacts that improvement in trust will influence. Now, you will know as a marketeer working in this sort of world, and I used to work implementing IT systems, and we had our return on investments and our business cases and everything else. And we know that there's always an element of an art and a science about this, but it's an important discipline, nevertheless, to do the hard work of linking outcomes to the effort that you put and the investment you put into these initiatives. So, for example, in that example that I talked about with the sports club, they measured it through reduction in staff attrition. When we started engaging with that client, staff attrition was at 40%. And the goal was to reduce that to less than 20% over a 12 months period. And part of the strategy was, through working and improving trust. And so that goal was achieved. That was a goal that organization could make tangible in terms of, dollars. And it satisfied the chief financial officer that was a sufficiently tangible outcome
For
for
sure.
them to commit to this project. We also work in the public sector in the UK with a number of hospitals and hospital trusts. Now, obviously, in a hospital trust, the measurement of impact is different. It's not necessarily about the bottom line in quite the way that we talk about in the private sector. But in the UK, every hospital is inspected and rated by the regulator, on a frequent basis, and we have different levels of quality care that are used to rank hospitals. And the hospitals that we worked at with our trust score were looking to get an outstanding rating, which is the top rating for a hospital in this country. And so that was the way that they made it tangible and focused on that the next audit they would achieve this outstanding status, and they did achieve that. Now they obviously had to make a number of steps to do that, one of which was the focus on trust and being able to identify specific improvements in terms of the leadership of the hospital that had come about through this initiative. So for each client is going to have a slightly different way of measuring and quantifying the impact of focusing on trust. And it's a bit like the measurement of trust itself. We have to be equally disciplined in setting those goals, tracking the impact, and making sure we have a credible audit trail between trust and these business outcomes or organizational outcomes.
Okay, you did very well with that, Dr. Blakey. So I'm going to try and throw another curveball at you here as we're nearing the top of the hour, and it's kind of a takeaway. Everything you're saying sounds great. I'm sure an executive is hearing this. Is there anything specifically they can do right now to build their trust in what you're saying, to kind of take some baby steps forward to get some small wins on their part immediately?
Yeah, maybe I think of sort of 3 tips from, one from each of these areas of ability, integrity, and benevolence. So in the area of ability and delivery, a quick tip for most leaders would be simply ask more questions. Ask questions of everyone you meet. One of our questions in the survey for that habit of coaching is, do you ask questions of everyone you meet? It's as simple as that, and some people do and some people don't. But people who ask questions of everyone they meet tend to be more trusted than people who don't.
Interesting.
It's just the way it works. So that would be a little tip from the habits of ability. Habits of integrity. We know about being honest, but I think being open is a little bit more subtle. So the tip there, it relates to this word vulnerability, that a lot of leaders are wary of showing vulnerability. But vulnerability, if shown in the right way at the right time, can be a very powerful builder of trust, because it demonstrates that you're human, and people want to work for human beings, not job titles. People will build trust if they see the humanity in you. And sometimes that humanity is that you make mistakes like they do. And if the leader can be open about that and honest about that in an appropriate way, then that's a powerful driver of trust. So think about how you might be a next sort of level of openness that you could offer to your team or your staff to build trust in that way. And finally, in the habits of benevolence, then kindness is one of the habits of benevolence, and I call kindness the purple dye of trust. All it takes is one drop, and it changes the whole complexion of a meeting or a conversation. It's really a very powerful tool. So a simple thank you, a simple recognition of people, an inquiry into their well-being, it goes a huge long way. So random acts of kindness, what random act of kindness could you bring to the workplace? Because if you're the CEO, the great thing is you get to make people's day every day. If you want to show a little bit of this, drop a little bit of this kindness into the mix, then it makes people's day. And why wouldn't you want to do that? And particularly when you know that it's part of building trust, and trust is the one thing that changes everything.
One last quick question. It doesn't have to be a long answer, but I mean, a lot of what you're talking about has to do with emotional intelligence as well. Have you seen with executives, anybody go down this road and start building trust and then say, you know what, this isn't working, and then they go back to their old ways?
Well, you get to know about that when when a crisis hits. I mean, it's very easy to focus on trust in the good times, but when trouble comes, which it always does at some point, then that's when you get tested. I think where your instinct around power and control, you can knee jerk back into command and control styles of leadership in a crisis. Now, people will understand that if it's, if there's a fire in the building and you suddenly shout, get out of the building. I mean, people are going to say, yeah, I don't need you to sort of,
Yeah,
finesse that too much.
right.
But I think the instinct to go back to command and control in a crisis is a temptation that some leaders find hard to resist. And it's about, being able to recognize when it happens. Sometimes it's appropriate to use that style in an emergency, but then you need to come out of that and you need to recognize that the emergency is over and now it's back to the hard work of building trust. So I think that's the temptation, Greg, that most leaders have to be wary of. And that's where, I'm a coach. Coaches get alongside leaders in all sorts of different situations. And sometimes having somebody like a coach or a trusted advisor alongside you, they can recognize when those things are happening and where you might be tempted to sort of compromise on some of these habits, and just have that conversation, use the model, and keep measuring it, because that will also tell you whether it's working or not.
Fantastic, Dr. Blakey. I really enjoyed the interview, and I really enjoy your perspective and the balance between the quantitative and qualitative. If someone wants to work with you or wants to learn more about your approach, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, there's the book, The Trusted Executive, which is available at all great bookstores, and my website is at www.johnblakey.co.uk. So that's the easiest way to get hold of me, or obviously I'm on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, welcome any reactions, questions, input to the debate that we're having. And one of the great things about that Harvard Business Review articles, it's got me talking to a lot of people who are passionate about trust, like yourself. And I'm sure there's more out there. So if this is a passion of yours and you want to stand for trust, then please connect. There's lots of resources that I can share and provide access to help you on that path.
Okay. Well, thanks again for joining us. Go enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on another edition of Thought Leaders Live.
Thanks, Greg.